My egg beater imitation is pretty good, I think, but it's also useless. Not many people use an old-fashioned egg beater anymore. Most of the children I try this for have no idea what an old-fashioned egg beater is. And it's a shame, my imitation, which I did learn from a childhood buddy named Mark Van Dusen, God rest his soul, that imitation is really pretty good, but it's really pretty useless. Now, our reading today from the letter to the Ephesians includes a challenge to an imitation, but this is the highest and most useful imitation of all. Be imitators of God as dearly loved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself for us, an offering and sacrifice to God. Now there is a useful imitation, but it's almost impossible. Imitate God? Walk in love as Christ walked? Because we are God's beloved children, sure, but are we able to do that? The most difficult teaching Jesus ever gave may be when he said, "Love your enemies." That sounds just as impossible as imitating God, but it's the same thing. Jesus went on to say that God makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. In other words, God blesses everybody. Jesus says, imitate the sun and the rain. Ephesians says, imitate God. Walk in love as Christ loved us. I think this is really, really, really difficult. How in the world can we do it? Well, there's really only one way. You know the old musician's joke. Guy's walking down a street in New York City, stops a stranger and says, "Excuse me, can you tell me how to get to Carnegie Hall?" What's the answer? Practice. Practice. Practice being God. The New Testament says over and over that God's purpose is to transform us, to change us, to mold us into the very image of Christ. We really are going to be the body of Christ. You are what they eat, they say, and week by week we feed on the life of Christ in this bread and this wine. You are going to be divine someday. You are going to be Christ someday. Now you are a Christian, and that word means little Christ. Someday you and I are going to be the real thing. So we might as well start practicing. Now, my favorite priest in the whole wide world died a few weeks ago. His name was Bob Liebenow, and he lived well into his 90s. I got to see him several times over the past 20 years since his retirement. He was my boss when I was just starting out as a priest. I was his assistant priest at Trinity Church in Wheaton, Illinois, right near Chicago. I learned a lot from him. He was a wise man, and he was a kind man. One of the things he said again and again in sermons and in personal conversations is something you have heard me say a lot. He always said this: be kind. Everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. It was something he had read, and he repeated that a lot, and he lived it a lot. And I have gladly passed his words on whenever I can, and I've added my own words to it. Be kind. Everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle, so bring good cheer and a listening ear. Imitating God is done in small steps. Someone once said, "We don't do great things, we do small things with great love." The truly wise Christian practices being God, as crazy as that sounds. Be imitators of God as dearly loved children, and walk in love. I have often joked with my wife that if you go to a Giroux family reunion, it's easy to tell the in-laws from the outlaws. there is a look that many of the Giroux have, especially the males. Giroux guys often have a prominent French-Canadian nose and little, beady, close-set blue eyes. That's the family resemblance, like it or not. Now, you and I are God's kids, and like it or not, there will be a family resemblance. You become like your parent. You become like your family. You do become like your God. So, walk in love, as Christ loved us and gave himself for us, an offering and sacrifice to God. Amen.